Legionaries. Today, we delve into the heart of our campaign in Gaul, a tale of conquest and discovery that he, Gaius Julius Caesar, have penned for the annals of Rome. In this sixth book of our Gallic wars, you shall witness not only the might of our legions, but also the customs and character of those we seek to bring under Roman rule. From the treacherous forests of the Treveri to the vast expanse of the Rhine, we have marched, fought, and observed. You will learn of the Druids, those enigmatic priests of the Gauls, and the fierce knights who rally to battle at a moment's notice. We shall compare these Gallic adversaries to their Germanic neighbors, whose primitive ways both intrigue and alarm us. As we pursue the elusive Ambiorix, scourge of the Eburones, you will witness the challenges we faced in this land of marshes and endless woods. Yet, through our Roman discipline and the favor of the gods, we shall prevail. Prepare yourselves, for in this account, you will find not only the glory of our conquests, but also wisdom to guide our great republic in the governance of these new territories. Let us begin our journey through the wilds of Gaul, where every step forward is a step for Rome. How will Caesar make sure the Gauls don't conspire against the Roman anymore? Who will be more in danger, Caesar or Ambiorix? Subscribe and watch the video to discover it. For many reasons, expecting a greater disturbance in Gaul, Caesar ordered a levy to be conducted by his legates Marcus Silanus, Gaius Antistius Reginus, and Titus Sextius. At the same time, he requested from Gnaeus Pompey, the proconsul, that since he remained near the city with command for the sake of the republic, he should order those whom he had enlisted under the consular oath from Cisalpine Gaul to assemble and proceed to him. He believed it was very important for the future perception of Gaul that Italy's resources appeared so vast that if any setback were suffered in the war, it could not only be quickly repaired, but also augmented with larger forces. Pompey, contributing this both to the republic and their friendship, quickly completed the levy through his men, and before the end of winter, 3 legions had been raised, equipped, and brought, doubling the number of cohorts lost with Quintus Titurius. By this speed and the size of the forces, he demonstrated the power and discipline of the Roman people. After Indutiomarus was killed, as we have explained, the command of the Treveri was transferred to his relatives. They did not cease to solicit neighboring Germans and offer money. When they could not gain support from the nearest tribes, they tried further ones. Having found some willing tribes, they confirmed their agreements with oaths and secured their promises with hostages. They allied themselves with Ambiorix through a pact and treaty. When Caesar learned of these events, seeing that war was being prepared on all sides, the Nervii, Aduatuci, and Menapii, along with all the Germans on the near side of the Rhine, were in arms. The Senones did not come at his command and were communicating plans with the Carnutes and neighboring tribes, and the Treveri were frequently soliciting the Germans with embassies. He thought it prudent to consider war more seriously. Therefore, before winter was over, he assembled the nearest 4 legions and unexpectedly marched into the territory of the Nervii. Before they could either gather or flee, he captured a large number of people and livestock, and after allowing the soldiers to take this spoil and devastating the fields, he forced them to surrender and give hostages. Having swiftly concluded this matter, he returned the legions to their winter quarters. With the Council of Gaul announced for the beginning of spring, as he had previously established, and seeing that all had come except for the Senones, Carnutes, and Treveri, he judged this the beginning of rebellion and revolt. He decided to move the council to Lutetia of the Parisii, who were neighboring the Senones and had joined their state during the memory of their fathers, but were thought to have been absent from this council. After announcing this from the platform, he marched the same day with the legions to the Senones, covering great distances. Upon learning of his arrival, Acco, who had been the leader of this plan, ordered the people to assemble in the towns. Before they could accomplish this, it was reported that the Romans were approaching. Out of necessity, they abandoned their plan and sent envoys to Caesar to seek pardon, approaching through the Aedui, with whom their state had been allied since ancient times. Caesar, willingly granting pardon to the petitioning Aedui, accepted their excuse, considering that the pressing summer campaign was for war, not for holding trials. After demanding hostages and handing over 100 to the Aedui for safekeeping, the Carnutes also sent envoys and hostages, using the Remi as mediators who were their patrons. They received the same responses. Caesar held the council and ordered the tribes to provide cavalry. With this part of Gaul pacified, he focused his mind and efforts entirely on the war against the Treveri and Ambiorix. He ordered Cavarinus to accompany him with the cavalry of the Senones to prevent any disturbances in his absence due to his anger or the hatred he had incurred from the state. Having settled these matters, knowing that Ambiorix would not engage in a pitched battle, he considered what other strategies Ambiorix might employ. The Menapii, neighboring the Eburones, were fortified by continuous marshes and forests, and had never sent envoys to Caesar to seek peace. Caesar knew Ambiorix had a refuge with them, and had learned that he had also established friendly relations with the Germans through the Treveri. He thought these supports should be removed before attacking Ambiorix directly, to prevent him from hiding among the Menapii or forcing an encounter with the Trans-Rhenane Germans in desperation. With this plan, he sent the baggage of the entire army to Labienus among the Treveri and ordered 2 legions to proceed to him. He himself set out with 5 light-armed legions against the Menapii. Relying on the protection of their location, they fled into the woods and marshes with all their possessions without assembling any troops. Caesar, dividing his forces with Gaius Fabius, the legate, and Marcus Crassus, the quaestor, quickly built bridges and approached from 3 sides, burning buildings and villages, and seizing a large number of cattle and people. Compelled by these actions, the Menapii sent envoys to seek peace. Caesar accepted their hostages and confirmed that he would consider them enemies if they harbored Ambiorix or his envoys within their borders. Having settled these matters, he left Commius the Atrebation with the cavalry as a guard among the Menapii, and set out himself for the Treveri. While these things were happening under Caesar's command, the Treveri, having assembled large forces of infantry and cavalry, prepared to attack Labienus with 1 legion that was wintering in their territory. They were not more than a 2 days' march away from him when they learned that 2 legions had arrived, sent by Caesar. They established their camp about 15 miles away to wait for the German reinforcements. Labienus, aware of the enemy's plans and hoping their recklessness would provide an opportunity for battle, left 5 cohorts to guard the baggage and set out against the enemy with 25 cohorts and a large cavalry force. He established his camp about a mile from the enemy. A river with steep banks, difficult to cross, lay between Labienus and the enemy. He had no intention of crossing it himself and did not believe the enemy would either. The hope for reinforcements grew daily. Labienus, speaking openly in council, said that since the Germans were reported to be approaching, he would not risk the fortunes of himself and his army and would move the camp at first light the next day. This was quickly reported to the enemy, as some of the many Gallic horsemen were naturally inclined to favor Gallic interests. Labienus, summoning the tribunes of the soldiers and the centurions of the first ranks during the night, laid out his plan, and to more easily deceive the enemy with the appearance of fear, ordered the camp to be moved with more noise and commotion than was customary for the Roman people. By these actions, he created the appearance of a retreat. These details were also reported to the enemy before dawn due to the proximity of the camps. Barely had the rear of the column passed beyond the fortifications when the Gauls, encouraging each other not to let the expected booty slip from their hands, saying it would be too long to wait for the German reinforcements when the Romans were already frightened, and it was beneath their dignity not to dare to attack such a small band, especially one that was fleeing and encumbered, did not hesitate to cross the river and engage in battle on unfavorable ground. Labienus, suspecting this would happen and wanting to draw them all across the river, continued his march with the same pretense of retreat. Then, after moving his baggage slightly ahead and placing it on a certain hill, he said, "Soldiers, you have the opportunity you have asked for. You have the enemy caught in a difficult and disadvantageous position. Show the same bravery to us, your leaders, that you have often shown to the commander-in-chief, and imagine that he is here and watching this personally." At the same time, he ordered the standards to turn towards the enemy and the line to be formed. He left a few troops to guard the baggage and placed the rest of the cavalry on the flanks. Our men quickly raised a shout and threw their javelins at the enemy. When the Gauls, seeing this unexpected move, realized that those whom they believed to be fleeing were actually coming at them with hostile intentions, they could not withstand the attack and fled to the nearest woods at the first encounter. Labienus, pursuing them with his cavalry, killed a large number, captured many, and a few days later, recovered the state. For the Germans who were coming to aid, upon learning of the Treveri's flight, returned home. The relatives of Indutiomarus, who had been the instigators of the revolt, accompanied them out of the state. The leadership and command were handed over to Cingetorix, who, as we have shown, had remained loyal from the beginning. Well, Labienus was very clever here. What will be the reaction of the Gauls now? What will be their next move against the Romans? Subscribe not to miss the next chapters of the Gallic Wars. Will Ambiorix organize yet another conspiracy with the help of the Germans? What will Caesar do to prevent it? Subscribe to the channel and watch the video to know it. Have fun. After coming from the Menapii to the Treveri, Caesar decided to cross the Rhine for two reasons. First, because they had sent reinforcements to the Treveri against him. Second, to prevent Ambiorix from having a refuge with them. After making these decisions, he began to build a bridge a little above the place where he had previously led his army across. Using the same method and with great enthusiasm from the soldiers, the work was completed in a few days. Leaving a strong garrison among the Treveri at the bridge to prevent any sudden movements from them, he led the rest of the forces and cavalry across. The UB, who had previously given hostages and surrendered, sent envoys to him to clear themselves, explaining that they had neither sent reinforcements to the Treveri from their state nor broken their loyalty. They begged and pleaded that they should not suffer punishment for the crimes of others out of general hatred for the Germans. They promised to provide more hostages if he wished. Caesar, having understood the situation, found that the reinforcements had been sent by the Suebi. He accepted the explanation of the UB and inquired about the routes and approaches to the Suebi. A few days later, the UB informed Caesar that all the Suebi were gathering their forces in one place and were instructing the tribes under their control to send reinforcements of infantry and cavalry. Upon learning this, Caesar made provisions for grain, selected a suitable place for a camp, and ordered the UB to drive their livestock into the towns and bring all their possessions from the fields into the strongholds, hoping that the lack of supplies would force the barbarians and inexperienced people to fight under unfavorable conditions. He ordered frequent scouting missions to the Suebi to find out what was happening among them. The UB carried out these orders, and after a few days, they reported back that the Suebi, upon receiving reliable news about the Roman army, had withdrawn with all their forces, and those of their allies to the farthest part of their territory, into an enormous forest called Basinus, which extended far inward and acted as a natural wall, preventing incursions and attacks between the Suebi and the Cherusci. The Suebi decided to await the arrival of the Romans at the edge of this forest. Since we have reached this point, it seems appropriate to describe the customs of Gaul and Germany and how these nations differ from each other. In Gaul, not only within every state and in every district and region, but almost in each household, there are factions, and the leaders of these factions are those who are considered to have the highest authority in their judgment, to whose decision and judgment the ultimate resolution of all matters and plans is referred. It seems that this institution was established long ago for this reason, that no one from the common people should lack assistance against the more powerful, as everyone ensures that their followers are not oppressed or circumvented. Otherwise, they would have no authority among their people. This same principle applies to the whole of Gaul, for all the states are divided into two factions. When Caesar arrived in Gaul, the Aedui were the leaders of one faction and the Sequani of the other. Since the Sequani were weaker on their own, as the Aedui had traditionally held the highest authority and had many clients, they allied themselves with the Germans and Ariovistus, and brought them over to their side with great promises and offers. After several successful battles and the killing of all the Aeduan nobility, the Sequani became so powerful that they drew many of the Aedui's clients to their side, took the sons of Aeduan leaders as hostages, and forced them to swear that they would not make any plans against the Sequani. They also occupied part of the Aedui's territory by force and assumed leadership over all of Gaul. Driven by necessity, Diviciacus went to Rome to seek help from the Senate, but returned unsuccessful. However, with Caesar's arrival, the situation changed. The Aedui got their hostages back, their old client networks were restored, and new alliances were formed through Caesar. Those who had joined the Aedui's friendship saw that they were treated with better conditions and more equitable rule. As a result, the Sequani lost their preeminence, which was taken over by the Remi. The Remi, understanding that they were gaining favor with Caesar, were joined by those who, because of old enmities, could not align with the Edui. These people placed themselves under the Remi's protection. Thus, the Remi maintained their newly acquired and sudden authority. At that time, the state of affairs was such that the Edui were considered the leading people, and the Remi held the second place in dignity. In all of Gaul, there are two kinds of people who are of any rank and honor. The common people are almost in the position of slaves. They dare not act on their own and are not consulted in any matters. Most, when oppressed either by debt, heavy tributes, or the injuries of the powerful, surrender themselves into servitude to the nobles, who have the same rights over them as masters over their slaves. Of these two classes, one is the Druids, and the other is the Knights. The Druids officiate at the worship of the gods, regulate public and private sacrifices, and explain religious questions. A great number of young men flock to them for training, and they are held in great honor. They decide almost all disputes, whether public or private. If any crime has been committed, if a murder has occurred, if there is a dispute about inheritance or boundaries, they decide it and decree rewards and punishments. If anyone does not abide by their decision, they are banned from the sacrifices, which is the heaviest punishment among them. Those who have been thus banned are considered impious and wicked. Everyone avoids them, shuns their approach and conversation, for fear of receiving harm from their contact. Justice is not given to them when they seek it, and no honor is granted to them. One Druid is in charge over all the others and holds the highest authority among them. Upon his death, if any among the rest is of distinguished standing, he succeeds. If there are several equals, the succession is decided by a vote of the Druids, sometimes even by force of arms. These Druids meet at a certain time of the year in a consecrated place in the territory of the Carnutes, which is considered the center of all Gaul. Everyone who has a dispute comes together from all directions and abides by their decrees and judgments. It is believed that this system of discipline originated in Britain and was transferred to Gaul, and now those who wish to study the subject more thoroughly generally go to Britain to learn. The Druids are accustomed to being exempt from war, nor do they pay tribute together with the rest. They have an exemption from military service and freedom from all burdens. Attracted by such great rewards, many join their ranks of their own accord, while others are sent by their parents and relatives. It is said that they learn a great number of verses there, and so some remain in training for 20 years. They do not think it proper to commit their doctrines to writing, though in almost all other matters, public and private, they use Greek letters. They seem to me to have established this practice for two reasons: because they do not want their teachings to become common knowledge, and because they do not want their students to rely on writing and neglect the cultivation of memory, which happens to many when they rely on written texts. They want to instill this above all, that souls do not perish, but after death pass from one body to another. And they believe that this doctrine is a great incentive to bravery, as it makes men disregard the fear of death. They discuss and hand down to the young many things concerning the stars and their movements, the size of the world and the earth, the nature of things, and the power and authority of the immortal gods. Will Caesar face the Druids now? Let's have a look. The next video will tell us more. Subscribe to this channel and share the video if you liked it. See you in the next Gaulish tale. Caesar told us about Druids in the previous story, and now is going to tell us about knights and wicker men of immense size. Don't forget to subscribe not to miss more content about Caesar Conquers. The other class is that of the knights. When there is a need and any war arises, which generally used to happen every year before Caesar's arrival, either because they themselves were inflicting injuries or repelling those inflicted upon them, all of them engage in warfare, and as each one is most distinguished by birth and resources, they have the most vassals and clients around them. They recognize this as their only influence and power. The entire nation of the Gauls is greatly devoted to religious beliefs, and for that reason, those who are affected by more serious illnesses and those who are involved in battles and dangers either sacrificed human beings as victims or vow that they will sacrifice them, and they use the Druids to perform these sacrifices, because they believe that unless a man's life is given for a man's life, the will of the immortal gods cannot be appeased. They also have sacrifices of the same kind established publicly. Others have wicker men of immense size, the limbs of which, woven from wicker, they fill with living men. After these are set on fire, the men are surrounded by the flames and perish. They believe that the punishment of those caught in theft, robbery, or some other offense is more pleasing to the immortal gods. But when the supply of that kind of victim is lacking, they even descend to the punishment of the innocent. They especially worship the god Mercury. There are many images of him. They regard him as the inventor of all arts, the guide of journeys and marches, and believe he has the greatest power over gains and commercial transactions. Next to him, they worship Apollo, Mars, Jupiter, and Minerva. About these gods, they hold almost the same opinion as other nations. They believe that Apollo drives away diseases, Minerva teaches the principles of works and crafts, Jupiter rules the heavens, and Mars controls wars. When they have decided to engage in battle, they usually vow to dedicate the spoils of war to him. After they have conquered, they sacrifice the captured animals and collect the remaining goods in one place. In many cities, you can see piles of these items in consecrated places, and it rarely happens that anyone, disregarding the religious obligation, dares to take any of the captured goods or to hide any of them at home. And the most severe punishment with torture has been established for this crime. The Gauls declare that they are all descended from the god Dis and say this had been handed down by the Druids. For this reason, they count the periods of all time not by the number of days, but by the number of nights. They observe birthdays and the beginnings of months and years in such a way that the day follows the night. In the rest of their customs of life, they differ mainly from the rest of mankind in this, that they do not allow their children to approach them openly until they have grown up to the extent that they can bear the duty of military service, and they consider it shameful for a son of childish age to stand in public in the sight of his father. The men, as much money as they have received from their wives as a dowry, they match with an equal amount from their own goods after a valuation has been made. A joint account is kept of this whole sum, and the profits are saved. Whichever of them survives, the portion of both, along with the profits from previous times, comes to that one. Men have the power of life and death over their wives as well as over their children, and when a man of high rank dies, his relatives gather, and, if the circumstances of his death raise any suspicion, they hold an inquiry into the wives in the manner of slaves, and if found guilty, they execute them after subjecting them to torture and all kinds of torments. Their funerals, according to the custom of the Gauls, are magnificent and costly. They throw into the fire all things that they think were dear to the deceased while alive, including animals. And just a little before our time, slaves and clients who were known to have been loved by their masters were burned together with them in a duly completed funeral. Those states which are considered to manage their public affairs more advantageously have it decreed by law that if anyone hears any rumor or report concerning the state from their neighbors, they are to convey it to a magistrate and not communicate it to anyone else, because it is known that reckless and inexperienced men are often frightened by false rumors and driven to some wrongdoing, and often take drastic decisions about the most important matters. The magistrates conceal what they deem necessary and disclose to the public what they think is beneficial. It is not allowed to speak about public affairs except in a council. The Germans differ greatly from this custom, for they have neither druids to preside over religious matters, nor do they care much for sacrifices. They consider as gods only those whom they can see, and whose help they evidently receive, namely the sun, Vulcan, and the moon, and they have not even heard of the others. Their whole life is spent in hunting and in military pursuits. From their earliest youth, they are trained in labor and hardship. Those who have remained chaste for the longest time receive the greatest praise among their people. They think that this practice increases stature, strengthens muscles, and fortifies the body. It is considered most disgraceful for a young man to have relations with a woman before the age of 20, and of this there is no secrecy, for they bathe together in the rivers and use only skins or small coverings of reindeer hides, leaving a great part of their body naked. They do not focus on agriculture, and most of their diet consists of milk, cheese, and meat. No one has specific land or personal boundaries. Instead, the magistrates and leaders assign land annually to tribes and groups of people who have gathered together, granting as much and in whatever location they deem appropriate, and they force them to move the following year. They offer many reasons for this practice, so that people, captivated by continuous familiarity, do not exchange their enthusiasm for waging war for agriculture, so that they do not strive to acquire extensive estates and expel the less powerful from their possessions, so that they do not build more carefully to avoid cold and heat, so that no greed for money arises, which could lead to factions and disputes, so that they can keep the common people in good spirits, since everyone sees that their own wealth is equal to that of the most powerful. It is a great honor for their communities to have vast uninhabited areas around them after expelling their neighbors. They consider it a mark of valor to have their neighbors driven out of their lands, and to ensure that no one dares to settle nearby. At the same time, they believe they will be safer because the fear of sudden incursions is removed. When a state is defending itself or launching an attack, magistrates are elected with the power of life and death to lead the war. In peacetime, there is no common magistrate, but the leaders of the regions and districts administer justice and settle disputes among their people. They do not consider it disgraceful to commit robbery beyond the borders of their own state, and they claim it is done to train their young men and reduce idleness. When a leader declares in a council that he will lead, and those who approve of the cause and the man promise their support, they stand up and are praised by the assembly. Those who do not follow are considered deserters and traitors, and they lose all credibility in future matters. They consider it unlawful to violate a guest. Those who come to them for any reason are protected from harm and treated as sacred, with open houses and shared provisions. Now we know more about Gauls and Germans, but there is more. Subscribe to the channel to get more insights into Caesar's conquers. See you in the next video. How was the life in Gaul and in the Germania before Caesar arrived? Where is gone Ambiorix? Discover it in this new chapter. Don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell. There was a time when the Gauls surpassed the Germans in valor, waging wars offensively and sending colonies across the Rhine due to their large population and lack of land. Thus, the most fertile areas of Germany around the Hercynian forest, which I see is known by name to Eratosthenes, and some Greeks who call it the Orsinian forest, were occupied by the Volcae Tectosages who settled there. This tribe remains in those places to this day, and is highly regarded for its justice and military prowess. Although they continue to live in the same poverty, scarcity, and endurance as the Germans, and use the same diet and lifestyle, the proximity of the provinces and the knowledge of foreign goods has gradually led to the Gauls being overcome and defeated in many battles, so that they no longer even compare themselves to the Germans in terms of valor. The breadth of the Hercynian forest, as described above, spans a 9-day journey for a lightly armed traveler. It cannot be measured otherwise, as they do not know how to calculate distances. It starts from the territories of the Helvetii, Nemetes, and Borassi, and extends along the Danube River to the borders of the Dacians and Enarts. Then it bends to the left, reaching the territories of many tribes due to its vastness. No one from Germany claims to have reached its beginning, even after a 60-day journey, nor have they heard where it begins. Many species of wild animals, unknown in other places, are found there, of which the following are considered particularly noteworthy and worth recording. There is an ox of the shape of a stag, with a single horn in the middle of its forehead between its ears, taller and straighter than those we know. From its top, branches like palms spread out widely. The female has the same shape and size of horns as the male. There are also creatures called alces. These are similar in shape and hide to goats, but are slightly larger and lack horns. Their legs have no joints, and they do not lie down to rest. If they accidentally fall, they cannot get up or lift themselves. Trees serve as their resting places. They lean against them and rest only slightly reclined. Hunters, observing their tracks and learning where they habitually rest, either undermine the roots or cut the trees almost completely through so that only the top appears to be standing. When they lean against them by habit, the weakened trees collapse under their weight and the alces fall with them. The third kind is the Uri. These are slightly smaller than elephants, but resemble bulls in appearance, color, and shape. They are very strong and fast, sparing neither man nor beast once they spot them. They actively hunt these creatures by capturing them in pits. Young men strengthen themselves through this labor and train in this kind of hunting, earning great praise if they kill many of these animals and bring their horns to the public as proof. The horns are significantly different in size, shape, and appearance from those of our domestic cattle. They are carefully encased in silver at the edges and used as drinking cups at large feasts. After learning from the UB scouts that the Suebi had retreated into the forests and fearing a shortage of grain, since, as I have previously noted, the Germans devote minimal attention to agriculture, Caesar decided not to advance further. But to prevent the barbarians from completely losing their fear of his return and to delay their reinforcements, he led his army back and cut off the end of the bridge that reached the UB's territory for 200 feet. At the far end of the bridge, he built a 4-story tower and stationed 12 cohorts to guard the bridge, fortifying the place with extensive defenses. He appointed Gaius Vulcatius Tullus, a young man, to command the garrison. Then, as the grain began to ripen, he set out to wage war against Ambiorix, sending Lucius Minucius Basileus ahead with all the cavalry to see what he could achieve with the speed of his march and the opportunity of the moment, instructing him to prohibit fires in the camp to avoid giving any signal of his arrival. Caesar declared he would follow immediately. Basileus did as instructed. Quickly and contrary to everyone's expectations, he completes the journey and surprises many in the fields. Based on their information, he heads to Ambiorix's location, where he is said to be with a few horsemen. Fortune greatly influences all things, especially military matters. It happened by great chance that he stumbled upon Ambiorix, caught off guard and unprepared. Before any news or rumor of their arrival could spread, Basileus' presence was seen by everyone. Thus, it was a great stroke of luck that despite having all his military equipment seized and his chariots and horses captured, Ambiorix managed to escape death. This was possible because his residence was surrounded by a forest, as is common with the Gauls, who often seek the proximity of forests and rivers to avoid the heat. His comrades and household members, confined in a narrow space, temporarily held off our cavalry's attack. While they were fighting, one of his men lifted Ambiorix onto a horse, and the woods concealed his flight. Hence, fortune played a significant role in both facing and avoiding danger. It is unclear whether Ambiorix did not gather his forces because he did not intend to engage in battle, or because he was taken by surprise and hindered by the sudden arrival of the cavalry, believing that the rest of the army was following. But certainly, after sending messengers through the fields, he ordered everyone to look out for themselves. Some fled to the Ardennes forest, others to the continuous marshes. Those nearest the ocean hid on islands formed by the tides. Many left their territories and entrusted themselves and their possessions to strangers. Catuvolcus, king of half of the Eburones, who had joined Ambiorix in the plan, being worn out by age and unable to endure the hardships of war or flight, cursed Ambiorix, who had been the author of the plan, with all his might, and took his own life with yew, which is abundant in Gaul and Germany. The Segni and Carnutes, from the tribe and number of the Germans, who are between the Eburones and the Treveri, sent ambassadors to Caesar, begging not to be considered enemies or to be judged by the same standard as all the Germans on this side of the Rhine. They stated that they had not thought of war and had sent no assistance to Ambiorix. Caesar, having verified this through interrogation of captives, ordered that if any Eburones had fled to them, they should be brought to him. If they complied, he promised not to harm their lands. Then, dividing his forces into 3 parts, he moved the baggage of all the legions to Ajuachuca. This is the name of a fort, situated in the middle of the Eburones' territory, where Titurius and Aurunculeius had wintered. He approved of this place for several reasons, especially because the fortifications from the previous year remained intact, reducing the soldiers' labor. He left the 14th Legion to guard the baggage, one of the 3 newly conscripted in Italy. He put Quintus Tullius Cicero in command of this legion and the camp, and assigned him 200 horsemen. It seems the winds of war are blowing again in Gaul. What do you think is going to happen next? Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. The next video will unveil Caesar's plans. With Ambiorix still at large, Caesar wants to close the loop and capture him. Will he succeed in his intent? Subscribe to the channel first and watch this new video. You might find the answer. Dividing his army, Caesar ordered Titus Labienus to march with 3 legions toward the ocean into the regions bordering the Menapii. He sent Gaius Trebonius with an equal number of legions to devastate the area adjacent to the Aduatuci. He himself decided to go with the remaining 3 legions to the river Scheldt, which flows into the Meuse and to the furthest parts of the Ardennes, where he heard Ambiorix had gone with a few horsemen. Upon departure, he promised to return in 7 days, knowing that grain would be due to the legion left as a garrison on that day. He encouraged Labienus and Trebonius to return by that day, if it was advantageous for the state, so they could share information, assess the enemy's strategies, and initiate a new campaign. As we have explained before, there was no specific force, no stronghold, no garrison that could defend itself with arms, but a scattered multitude in all directions. Wherever hidden valleys, wooded areas, or impassable marshes offered any hope of safety or refuge, people had settled. These places were known to the locals, and the situation required great diligence, not so much in protecting the entire army, for no danger could threaten all at once when they were scattered and terrified, but in preserving each individual soldier. This was partly important for the safety of the army, as the desire for plunder drew many far afield, and the forests, with their uncertain and hidden paths, prevented them from forming up. If one wanted to complete the task and wipe out this breed of criminals, it would be necessary to send out multiple detachments and scatter the soldiers. If one wanted to keep the soldiers in their ranks, as the established order and custom of the Roman army demanded, the location itself would favor the barbarians, and they would not lack the courage to ambush from hidden spots and surround the scattered soldiers. In such difficulties, all that could be foreseen with diligence was taken care of, ensuring that any harm inflicted was minimal, even though everyone burned with the desire for revenge, rather than causing harm with any loss of soldiers. Caesar sent messengers to the neighboring states, calling them all to him with the hope of plundering the Eburones, so that the Gauls would risk their lives in the forests rather than the legionary soldiers, and at the same time to wipe out the race and name of the tribe with a large surrounding force. A large number quickly gathered from all sides. These events were taking place in all parts of the Eburones' territory, and the 7th day was approaching, the day by which Caesar had planned to return to the baggage and the legion. Here it became clear how much fortune can accomplish in war and what chances it brings. With the enemies scattered and terrified, as we have described, there was no force that could cause even the slightest fear. The news reached the Germans across the Rhine that the Eburones were being plundered, and that everyone was being invited to join the pillage. The Sugambri, who lived closest to the Rhine, and from whom we had previously mentioned the Tencteri and Usipetes being received after their flight, gathered 2,000 horsemen. They crossed the Rhine with boats and rafts 30 miles below the place where the bridge had been built and where a garrison had been left by Caesar. They reached the first Eburones' territories, capturing many who had fled and dispersed, and seizing a large number of cattle, which the barbarians prized highly. Enticed by the plunder, they proceeded further. Neither the marshes nor the forests hindered these men, accustomed to war and banditry. They inquired from the captives where Caesar was. They discovered that he had gone further away and that the whole army had departed. One of the captives said, "Why do you pursue this miserable and meager plunder when you can now be the most fortunate? In 3 hours, you can reach Aduatuca. Here, the entire wealth of the Roman army has been brought, and the garrison is so small that it cannot even man the wall, and no one dares to step outside the fortifications." Tempted by this promise, the Germans left the plunder they had gathered hidden and hurried to Aduatuca, guided by the same man who had revealed this information. Cicero, who had kept the soldiers in the camp with the utmost diligence according to Caesar's orders and had not allowed even a single servant to go outside the fortifications, on the 7th day, doubting whether Caesar would keep his promise of the number of days, since he heard that Caesar had gone further and no news of his return was brought, and moved by the voices of those who called his patience almost a siege. If it was not allowed to leave the camp, expecting no such misfortune that they could be attacked within 3 miles despite the enemies being scattered and almost destroyed by the 9 legions and the large cavalry force, sent 5 cohorts to gather grain from the nearby fields. There was only one hill between them and the camp. Many sick soldiers had been left behind in the camp. About 300 of them, who had recovered during this time, were sent together under a single standard. Additionally, a large number of servants and a great number of pack animals, which had remained in the camp, followed with permission. At this very time, and by chance, The German horsemen arrived and immediately attempted to break into the camp through the Decuman gate, from which they had come, without even being noticed due to the woods that covered that side until they approached the camp. So much so that the merchants who had set up their tents near the rampart did not have time to retreat inside. Our men, surprised by this unexpected event, were greatly disturbed, and the cohort on guard barely withstood the first attack. The enemy surrounded the camp on all sides, trying to find an entry point. Our men struggled to defend the gates, while the location and fortifications themselves defended the other approaches. There was turmoil throughout the camp, with everyone asking each other the cause of the commotion. No one knew where to take the standards or where to gather. Some declared that the camp had been captured, while others insisted that the victorious barbarians, having destroyed the army and its commander, were now coming. Many invented new superstitions based on the location, recalling the calamity of Cotta and Titurius, who had perished in the same fort. With such fear spreading among everyone, the enemy was confirmed in their belief, as they had heard from a captive, that there was no garrison inside. They tried to break in and urged each other not to let such a great opportunity slip away. Publius Sextius Baculus, who had previously led the first century under Caesar, and whom we mentioned in earlier battles, was left behind sick with the garrison. He had been without food for 5 days. Distrusting his own safety and that of everyone else, he went out unarmed from his tent. Seeing the enemy approaching and the situation being critical, he took up arms from those nearby and positioned himself at the gate. The centurions of the cohort on guard followed him, and together they held off the attack for a while. Sextius, having received severe wounds, fainted and was dragged away to safety by his comrades. In the interval created, the rest of the soldiers gained enough confidence to stand on the fortifications and present the appearance of defenders. Meanwhile, our soldiers, having completed their foraging, heard the clamor. The cavalry hurried ahead and recognized the danger. There was no fortification to receive the terrified men. The newly conscripted and inexperienced soldiers turned to the tribunes and centurions, waiting for orders. No one was so brave as not to be disturbed by the sudden event. The barbarians, seeing the standards from a distance, ceased their attack. At first, they thought the legions had returned, as they had learned from the captives that they had gone further away. Then, realizing the small number of our men, they attacked from all sides. Cicero's court's again under siege. Will he resist until Caesar is back with his 3 legions? Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, not to miss the next video with the result of this new challenge. Panic among the Roman soldiers because of the sudden attack of Germanic tribes. How will Caesar react after knowing about this attack? Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and watch the video to know how the Book 6 of the Gallic Wars finishes. The camp servants rush to the nearest hill. Quickly driven back from there, they throw themselves among the standards and maniples, thus terrifying the already fearful soldiers even more. Some suggest forming a wedge to break through quickly, since the camp is so close, and they trust that if some part is surrounded and falls, the rest can still be saved. Others propose standing on the ridge and facing the same fate together. The experienced soldiers, whom we mentioned had left under a single standard, did not approve of this. Therefore, they encourage each other, and under the leadership of Gaius Trebonius, a Roman knight who was in command of them, they'd break through the enemy lines, and miraculously, all reach the camp safely. Following them, the camp servants and horsemen are saved by the soldiers' bravery. But those who remain on the ridge, having no experience in military matters, could neither maintain their decision to defend themselves from the higher ground, nor imitate the speed and force that they saw benefiting others. Attempting to retreat to the camp, they descended into an unfavorable position. The centurions, some of whom had been transferred to higher ranks in this legion from other legions due to their valor, fought valiantly and fell, not wanting to lose the military reputation they had previously earned. Part of the soldiers, driven by the courage of these men, reached the camp safely, beyond hope, while others, surrounded by the barbarians, perished. The Germans, having given up hope of storming the camp because they saw our men now established in their fortifications, retreated across the Rhine with the plunder they had stored in the woods. So great was the terror, even after the enemy's departure, that night, when Gaius Volusinus arrived at the camp with cavalry sent by Caesar, he could not convince them that Caesar and his army were safe. Fear had so overwhelmed their minds that they almost believed that all the troops had been destroyed and that the cavalry had returned from flight. They insisted that the Germans would not have dared to attack the camp if the army were intact. This fear was dispelled by Caesar's arrival. Upon his return, Caesar, fully aware of the circumstances of the battle, complained only about one thing, that the cohorts had been sent out from their post and the guard, saying that they should not have left their position for even the slightest reason. He recognized that fortune had played a significant role in the sudden arrival of the enemy, and even more so in driving the barbarians away from the very walls and gates of the camp. Of all these events, what seemed most remarkable was that the Germans, who had crossed the Rhine with the intention of ravaging Ambiorix's lands, had ended up inadvertently providing the greatest service to Ambiorix by attacking the Roman camp. Caesar set out again to harass the enemy, gathering a large number of men from the neighboring states and sending them out in all directions. All villages and buildings that anyone came across were set on fire. Plunder was taken from all places. Crops were consumed not only by the large number of animals and men, but also by the season and the rains, so that even those who had hidden themselves for the moment would inevitably perish from lack of resources once the army departed. Often, they came so close, dividing the cavalry in all directions, that the captives would claim they had just seen Ambiorix fleeing, and that he had barely escaped from view, spurring them on with the hope of catching him. The captives, motivated by the belief that they would earn great favor from Caesar, almost overcame nature with their zeal. It always seemed that just a little was missing for complete success, and Ambiorix would escape through hiding places or forests, seeking other regions and areas, protected by no more than 4 horsemen, the only ones he trusted with his life. After devastating the regions in this manner, Caesar led the army back to Dura Quartorum of the Remi, with the loss of only 2 cohorts. He summoned an assembly to that part of Gaul to investigate the conspiracy of the Senones and Carnutes, and, pronouncing a severe sentence on Acco, who had been the leader of that plan, and executed him according to the customs of their ancestors. Some, fearing judgment, fled. He forbade them water and fire. Caesar stationed 2 legions at the borders of the Treveri, 2 among the Lingones, and 6 in the territories of the Senones at Agedincum for winter quarters. After ensuring the army had provisions, as he had planned, he set out for Italy to conduct the administrative affairs. After all, it was not that bad. Ambiorix is still at large, but Caesar will get hold of him soon. After his trip to Rome, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell so that you know when the 5th chapter of the Book 7 is online.